Eagles insider, John McMullen from 97.3 ESPN.com, as he joins me every day at this time with a look at the National Football League. And, John, the Eagles finish up their 3-day OTA. Give me a little overview from your perspective of a couple of things that stood out, a couple of things you learned over the 3 days there.
Well, just the start of the process, as you know, Mike, so we got to see sort of the install of the Doug Peterson offense and the Jim Schwartz defense. And, the surprises, I think we talked about Alan Barber being inserted as the starting left guard. I think that's more lip service than anything else at that point, but nonetheless, the coach said that. Also, Brandon Graham taking a back seat to Connor Barwin at right defensive end. I think that was sort of newsworthy as we look forward to Jim Schwartz's 4-3 scheme. And I think the linebacking position as a whole, especially when Jordan Hicks wasn't there on Tuesday, it's nothing serious, just a little tightness in his legs, but you kind of see just how small the margin of error is for the team at that position, because there just isn't a lot of proven talent there. So they're either going to have to really coach up some of these young guys, whether it's a seventh-round pick like Joe Walker or undrafted free agent like Mike Tavares, or they're going to have to look to other rosters around the league when you get to training camp and guys start getting cut, because the backup positions at linebacker look a little bit scary, to be honest.
Yeah, and if you leave training camp, or I guess enter training camp, leave this first OTA saying they need to add some depth at these couple of positions, which couple of positions are they?
Well, I think it starts there, no question, linebacker. Interesting wide receiver, a lot of people, they probably need to add talent at wide receiver, but they have enough bodies. The problem there isn't that they don't have enough NFL players, because if you look at guys like Chris Givens and Ruben Randall, even T.J. Graham, who they brought in free agency, have been NFL players, but they're just not really, really good players. So I think they need to add talent at that position, but they have enough depth, if that makes sense. Defensive tackle is also, they're great in the starting lineup with Fletcher Cox when he finally gets here, and he will be here, in Benny Logan. But after those two guys, it falls off a cliff. And whether it's Bo Allen, who was injured, wasn't able to go on Tuesday, but he'll be back relatively soon. Taylor Hart, who's really a 3-4 player, a Chip Kelly-type defensive player. They've moved him to defensive tackle. They signed a former third-round pick from Tennessee, Mike Martin, but he's coming off a knee injury. So that defensive tackle position is another one where you say, oof, God forbid anything happens to one of those guys, because you're going to have a severe drop-off.
Yeah, and I guess a question to ask is, any of the ends a candidate to, shift inside at times, or do they just not have the build to be a 4-3 inside tackle on this team? I personally don't see that there's a guy out there, but maybe I'm missing someone.
No, there isn't. I mean, the one guy who could probably do it and has done it in the past is Vinny Curry, who has been an interior pass rusher in sort of nickel packages. But they're intent on keeping him out at defensive end and trying to finally tap in what he does so well, and that's rush the passer. So he's the one guy who you look at and say he's a natural defensive end, but he's also got the size to at least move inside as a pass rusher in some sub-packages. But the other guys are all converted linebackers, whether it's Connor or Marcus Smith or Travis Long or Brian Brayman. And Brandon Graham, the one natural defensive end besides Vinny, is undersized. So you can't really put him inside. So that's not really an option. And it's one of those things when you make these drastic shifts, and they did it 3 years ago, remember? They went from Andy Reid's 4-3 and to Chip Kelly's 3-4, so you had the drastic shift. They were drafting and bringing in players that fit the 3-4, and they were able to do that on the edges, and now all of a sudden you're switching back, and you're constantly in this focus where you have players who don't fit the particular scheme. But while I say that, the one real undeniable strength of Jim Schwartz is he'll look at those players and utilize them the best way he can.
Yeah, and I was more of a proponent of the 4-3. Even last year, John, I remember being over at the Golden Nugget having a day where we talked about, would they be better off as a 4-3 team? It seems like they got a lot of depth at defensive end. As you said, Barwin looks like he's ahead of Graham, which is a little bit surprising there. But they have some talent at the defensive end. I don't know that they have that outstanding, game plan that the offense has to game plan for type of pass rusher, but they've got some good depth at the end position, right?
Yeah, they do. They do. And I think you're right when you say they don't have the difference maker. A lot of people think Vinny can turn into that, but let's be realistic. You're talking about a guy who has played basically 30% or less of the snaps since he's been here, and that's because a lot of the time he was brought in as a 4-3 end in the Reed regime. He wasn't a fit for the Bill Davis scheme, and now he's back. So a lot of it is just circumstance, but to assume he's going to all of a sudden just step into this defense and be a pass rusher of the caliber of a guy who's going to get consistent double-digit sacks year in and year out, I'm going to have to see that before I declare it.
John McMullen's with us, 97.3 ESPN.com. The Eagles' 3-day OTAs in the books. They'll have another one coming up next week. And, I think the Bradford thing is kind of in the rearview mirror now. But, his teammates seem to be embracing him. That seems like it's something that we've all gotten past here. But my question goes to Carson Wentz. And, I know he wasn't there yesterday because of the rookie symposium thing there. But does it sound like a guy who was ahead of where they thought he would be when they drafted him? Because obviously the big talk is, he wasn't a Division I player. He's going to be he's going to need a lot of time. Does he look like a guy who's more polished than maybe they thought?
Yeah, I mean, it's very early. He certainly looks the part, though. There's no question about that. You can see why the Eagles liked him so much, and the fact that the skill set is outstanding. The arm talent is off the charts. And that's really, sort of like the NBA. And I'm sure you've been talking about the Sixers 1-2. It doesn't necessarily matter who the best college player is. It matters who projects better to the NFL level. And Carson does than a lot of other quarterbacks, not only because of the skill set, but because he played in a pro-style offense. And it doesn't matter if it's FCS, FBS. He had autonomy at the line of scrimmage. And a lot of college quarterbacks, most college quarterbacks, don't have that. So from that perspective, he's ahead of the curve. And I think that's one of the things the Eagles really liked about him, and they continue to think that he's ahead of where he should be.
Yeah, and that's something that Sam Bradford excelled in his last game, John, where Pat Shurmur allowed him to kind of make the calls. I'm really intrigued by what a full offseason of Bradford and, that ability to be a guy who's not kind of handcuffed. I think this is going to play out very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the interesting things in the offseason we talked about a couple times when people were questioning whether Sam would re-sign here and look at possible places he could have ended up. And obviously a lot of people put two and two together and said San Francisco because of Chip Kelly. But what people don't know is Sam hated that offense. He did. He couldn't help sort of expressing his disdain for it. He's too professional to come out and say it, but you could hear by the way he talked the fact that he wasn't allowed to change plays or do anything at the line of scrimmage. He just didn't enjoy it. So that was never even in his mind thinking about reuniting with Chip Kelly because he's thrilled about getting into a West Coast type offense where he can sort of do some things and hopefully prove he's more than what he has been. And I think that's one of the large disappointments he had because he was so excited about trying to get into this offense that he thought was a better fit for him. And then all of a sudden, you get the number 2 pick in the draft, and it becomes crystal clear to him. It doesn't matter what he does. He's not going to be the long-term answer. So I think that also played into why he was so upset.
Yeah, and, I think that will be something to definitely keep an eye on is the evolution of Bradford here. I've said many times on the show, John, Tom Brady had his worst year the year after he had ACL injury. Sure, he was on the field, but that certainly wasn't the Tom Brady that we all watch. McNabb had problems coming back that next year. You could get out there and play, but you're not going to be the same guy. I'm interested to see for the first time, really, and that I think that Sam can be judged very fairly will be this particular year coming up. A full year removed from that ACL, full offseason. Keep in mind, he did not get to go through the offense last year, and that's why I'm glad he's in there now, because he can't have that excuse, well, he wasn't in camp. I don't think there's any more excuses for this guy. And some people, I think yourself included, many out there, are done giving the guy excuses to begin with.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, he's had enough opportunity to show what he is as an NFL quarterback, and there's legitimate reasons to give him a break. And some of them, the fact that you're coming off, you're completely correct. I think the only player I've ever seen hit the ground running from an ACL injury is probably Adrian Peterson during his MVP year, but that was just the anomaly. That was a freak of nature. Generally, it takes people a calendar year before they're 100%. We've all talked about time and time again that he didn't have good skill position talent in St. Louis. To that, I would say, hey, he's not going to have great skill position talent here. That's just the reality of his career to this point. And if you look at the truly great quarterbacks, you bring up Tom Brady, who's obviously probably number 1 on that list in this generation. It hasn't mattered in the decade plus he's been in Foxborough if he's throwing the football to Randy Moss or Deion Branch or you name it. He just elevates his teammates, and that I have not seen from Sam. That's my biggest criticism of Sam to this point as an NFL quarterback.
All right, John, the NFC East Vegas over-unders came out. I want to get your take on them. Cowboys 9.5.
It's a little bit high, I think, and I think obviously if you look at them the year before last, when they were a juggernaut going to the NFC East title, obviously they're a good football team with Tony Romo under center, but he's also 36 years old. He's had the constant clavicle issues. Now he's got the chronic back issues, so I'm not sure you can count on him being there for 16 weeks. So I think that's a little bit high, but clearly if he's out on the field, if he's healthy, if Des Bryant is healthy, that's the best team in a bad division.
Giants, 8.
That's way too high. I think, as I sit here today, the Giants, to me, are the worst team in the NFC East.
Really?
The Eagles, yeah. And I think a lot of people get caught up in the money they spent in free agency. And just because you pay Olivier Vernon $90 million doesn't make him a $90 million player. And they were able to get a corner, Janoris Jenkins, who's better than what they had. They were able to get Snacks Harrison away from the Jets, who's a good player. And they probably won't be historically bad on the defensive side of the football any longer, but it's going to take a while for them to get going. So I think they're at the back end of the division with the Eagles.
That's interesting. Okay, Washington, 7.5.
And that's low. I mean, for some reason, people don't have respect for the Washington Redskins. I don't know if it's the owner, Daniel Snyder. People don't believe in Kirk Cousins. Whatever. This team has won. It's the division champions. Granted, it was a bad division. They've only improved in the off season. They keep adding talent. I think they and the Cowboys are definitely the top tier of the division, and the Eagles and Giants are the bottom tier, at least till we start and we see how things shake out. But I think the Washington Redskins are better than people give them credit for.
All right, and Philadelphia, 7.
Yeah, it tells you what people think of the talent level of this team. Number one, it's not great. It's really good at certain positions, but as a whole, 1 through 53, we kind of address some of the depth issues. It's a concern, and it's certainly a rebuilding phase. And we've talked about this plan of playing Sam and sticking Carson in the bubble wrap, so to speak. And I'm not sure if that's the best plan to have. It's sort of the Eagles trying to serve two masters in my mind. They want to rebuild, but they want to be relevant. And I don't know if that works. I really don't. We'll see. But I think that's right where they should be. I think Vegas got it right. They're going to be a 7, probably 8-win team if they overachieve. They underachieve, maybe 5 or 6, but that's right where they should be.
All right, so John says too high for Dallas, way too high for New York, too low for Washington, and just right. Sounds like the Three Little Bears coming into the NFC East here. Sports Bash 97.3 ESPN. John, a big story around the NFL, and we know your work over at todayspigskin.com covering the league nationally as you have for a long time. This Vegas thing still seems to be a pretty big deal. I know ESPN did a whole cover story on their new website, The Undefeated, about this whole situation with Vegas and why it's such a big deal. It sounds like L.A. or Oakland wants to go. Vegas wants them. There's trepidation here. We even had Jim Fossil last week, who was the last football coach in the UFL there. He said, this isn't a town that will support it. Why do you think there's such a big buzz and mystery around having a professional? Obviously, it's the gambling aspect, but do you think it would work? Do you think Oakland really wants to go there? Why the big story around Vegas?
Well, because it's one of the entertainment capitals of our country, so it's a natural fit as far as when you think about special events, whether it be a future Super Bowl, a future Pro Bowl, even the NFL draft. If you had a team situated there, it would be. And obviously, if they build a $1.4 billion stadium, you can almost guarantee there's going to be a future Super Bowl there. So, I think that's part of it, and the part is, the NFL has a history of using other cities as leverage when they want to get stadium deals done in certain parts of the country. We've seen it time and time again. For years, it was Los Angeles. So many teams used that as leverage before the Rams finally went back there. And I still think at this point, it's still a level. I think the NFL, their first intent is to get something done in California for both Oakland and San Diego. But at some point, if you can't get it done, if those cities refuse and don't want to be partners, you're eventually you have to hit a breaking point, and that's where Las Vegas would come in. I think things have shifted enough to where if you exhaust all other possibilities in your original city, you can get enough owners on board because there's so much new blood. The old school owners, the Maras, the Rooneys, people like that are always going to vote against Las Vegas, but you only need 3/4 of the vote to get it approved. And I think you could do that, but only if it becomes abundantly clear that a city like Oakland is just not going to do anything for the Raiders.
Yeah. Now, I mean, I guess, am I naive to the fact that why is having a team located in Vegas such a detriment? Like, do they, because a team calls home to Vegas that the league is going to have gambling problems? Like, I don't understand why a team having their home base in the actual city limits of Las Vegas is a huge issue.
Well, I think there's two reasons. One is the tourist aspect, and there's this mentality that there's not a lot of natural people who grew up in Vegas. It's all the transplants. So they think from that perspective, maybe the fan base is not going to be great enough. And maybe that would come into play with an NHL or even an NBA team, but certainly not with football. Football is an event. They would easily be able to sell out that stadium each and every week for the Raiders, certainly at first. And then, it becomes like any other city. Obviously, if you're 2-14, people probably aren't going to show up at the end of the year, but that's just a natural aspect of the beast, so to speak. So that part I think is kind of off base. And the gambling aspect, a lot of it's old school, because back in the day in the 60s or 50s, when players would have to get part-time jobs in the off season, there was always a concern that gamblers could pay them off. But if you think about what NFL players make today, nobody's going to be looking for extra money to throw games or shave points or anything of that nature. So a lot of that is old sort of theories that die hard and people kind of hang on to and believe they're still a possibility.
All right, John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com. What's happening with the Eagles OTAs next week? What's the schedule look like?
Same as this week, Tuesday through Thursday. And Tuesday will be the one practice open to the media, so that's when we'll get to see Carson Wentz back in town and see how he's progressed. Obviously, he only had 2 of 3 practices. Still very early in the process, and hopefully players like Jordan Hicks will be back most likely, and Bo Allen will have to see if he's able to get on the field. It's pretty clear. Obviously, Darren Sproles is not going to show up. Fletcher Cox is not going to show up. So we just keep moving on, trying to get the minicamp.
Yeah, and by the way, some news on the NFL. The Pro Bowl is going to be in Orlando, moving from from Hawaii. Hawaii wanted it back. Sydney, Australia showed some interest. I think Houston was in the mix, but it's going to be in Orlando. So WrestleMania and the Pro Bowl.
Yeah, and give credit to Orlando, because they did a $200 million renovation of the Citrus Bowl for this particular reason. They wanted to get events like, as you mentioned, WrestleMania, but also the Pro Bowl. And that stadium is now up to where you can have an event of that level as opposed to a rundown thing it was back in the past. So that's part of it. And obviously Orlando is sort of like Vegas without the gambling as far as tourism goes. So that's a tourism hub, and it's very easy for people to get to travel to. And I'm not a big fan of the Pro Bowl. I don't know anybody who is. I think it's gotten even worse.
I love that game.
Since they've gone to the fantasy football for real
awful
aspect. At least when it was AFC versus NFC, I've always said the game of football doesn't lend itself to an all-star game format.
No.
Like maybe basketball does or baseball does, because guys can get hurt. It's just they should take away the game completely and just keep the honor and just name guys Pro Bowlers. But you know what? It's the highest-rated all-star game every year, so it's all about money, and they're going to keep playing it.
All right, John McMullen has more on the NFL at JF McMullen on Twitter. And, of course, the Eagles OTAs continue next week, and John will be there. Thank you, John.
Hey, thank you, Mike.